Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Collins Street Baptist Church. What a beautiful venue for this sure to be fascinating session. Thank you so much for choosing this session. There's a lot of choice during the Interrobang Festival, and I think you've chosen a pretty good one to come to. My name is Sammy J. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and future. And I'd like to follow that up by welcoming our incredible panel with a round of applause. Science journalist, writer and human behaviour researcher Maggie Ryan Sandford, science fiction author and digital activist Cory Doctorow, and molecular biologist and science communicator Upulie Divisekera. Please make them welcome. I didn't want to read their entire biographies because I already feel inferior enough being on stage with these incredible brains. I'll be playing the role of the conduit today, or the ignoramus is the scientific term. We've been given some incredible questions from you, the public, over the last month or so, which we've filtered into the finest questions that best reflected the headline question of today that we're going to put to our panel. I'd like to start, though, by asking how you guys are going. Are you well?
Oh, yeah, it's all right. Thank you.
So far, so good. Are you two enjoying your time in our country? And that's a loaded question.
I've eaten a lot of banana bread.
Oh, nice. By choice, or are they forcing you?
This is what I do when I come to Australia. I work my way through the list of all the best banana bread in each city that I visit.
Nice.
So I've done 6 of the top 8 so far.
Is this going to be an article? Like,
where does no, I don't want to help anyone else find it. It's all for me. No. It's like I'm stealing it from other people's articles. So all I could say is try these people's recommendations. But it's all been very good.
Brilliant. Are they working you hard? You're all doing multiple events as part of the festival.
Exhaustively. We only have so many things we can think about at once, and it's all out there. You've all got it. It's all for you.
Okay, well, on that note, why don't we have an hour of completely random questions from the public, just to keep you on your toes. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
You guys up for that? Okay, let's do it. Let's go. Okay. I tried to start a clap and it didn't fire. Now I feel like an absolute loser. That's fine. Let's give him one more bit of love. I'm just happy that this session is not competitive. Last night we had a session at the Athenaeum where panellists were given points based on the quality of their responses. And I was a panellist during that. That was terrifying, but this is nice. This is just a genuine chat. And we're going to start with the headline question, and then we're going to delve even deeper. The first and most important question that came from the public was, does science fiction give us an unrealistic expectation that we can effectively inhabit Mars? Would anyone care to jump in?
Everyone's looking at me like I'm a science fiction writer or something. So I said on the last event that I did in this room that I'm a science fiction writer, which means that I'm in no way qualified to predict the future. And I think that that's very true of science fiction, that science fiction has very little predictive value. It makes a lot of predictions and some of them come true. The remarkable thing would be if you made enough predictions, if none of them came true, right? It doesn't mean that it's, being a Texas marksman is nothing to boast about, right? Firing the shotgun into the side of the barn and drawing the target around the pellets does not make you accurate. But I think that what science fiction does do is it reflects back our hopes and anxieties. And so I think of science fiction as being in a system with the world. And so science fiction writers and would-be science fiction writers imagine all of the different kinds of futures we can have. And then the collective unconsciousness of the world takes those futures that resonate with it and give them currency in any given moment. And what that tells you about is not the future, but the present. And I think science fiction is an excellent medium for predicting the present. And my interesting question about Mars is not, are we going to get to Mars or aren't we going to get to Mars? Is it realistic or not realistic to get to Mars? But why are we talking about Mars, right? Why is Mars, after years and, we had a great boon in space colonization stories that kind of waned, right? Why are we back into space colonization? Why has this become a story of some currency? So I have theories about why different science fiction tropes gain currency. I think the reason that we're still talking about The Matrix and Skynet, even though those, many of the people who evoke those stories weren't even born when those movies started, is because the idea of us becoming kind of the gut flora of transhuman, all-seeing, immortal, artificial life forms resonates for anybody who inhabits a world made of multinational corporations, right? Because they are transhuman life forms that are not only treat us as their inconvenient gut flora, but are legally enjoined from treating us with empathy, right? Like the cult of fiduciary duty says that wherever empathy interferes with shareholder value has to trump fiduciary duty, has to trump empathy, right? And so why do we care about space travel? Why are we talking about going to Mars all of a sudden? I mean, yeah, we have the rovers, but we had Voyagers going out past the outer planets and having getting sharp pictures of Saturn didn't make anyone go to Saturn. Saturn's way cooler looking than Mars, right? And I think it's because we have a kind of collective anxiety that we're not going to solve the collective action problem of climate change, and we're we need a plan B. And I don't think we have a plan B. I think whatever we end up doing with Mars, there is no way we can, the lifter problem is such that even if we took all of the excess energy on Earth and did nothing but lift mass out of the gravity well with it, we couldn't make a dent in our population. Mars is not plan B. Earth is the only plan we've got.
So that I would ask then, what does unrealistic mean, or what is realistic? What's the definition of an unrealistic expectation? I think lots of different science fiction has taken on the idea of inhabiting Mars. I don't know how many of them are a plan. Yeah, NASA and the various space organizations aren't going, let's do what they did in that one book. This seems like a good idea. Generally, there's a lot of different ways that plays out. And as far as I know, I guess each of those different fictional scenarios happens on a different timeline, but in theory, we don't have a real timeline. It's just sort of a race against the clock to see if we can have a plan B before we ruin our own planet. As long as we don't do that, as long as we are still going to survive on Earth, there's nothing unrealistic about it at all. We have all the time in the world to move to Mars. I mean, that sounds fun. And in the meantime, science fiction is inspiring scientists. The kids who are reading science fiction now grow up to be scientists. I mean, the first African-American woman in space thought she could do that because she watched Star Trek and saw Uhura on there, and that's a fact.
I felt like this question wasn't so relevant to me until Cory just said that we're not going to go to Mars, and I felt disappointed. And I realised that maybe it has engendered an unrealistic... I mean, is it possible, Upulie? Are we going to do it? Or...
Well, I'd sort of have two approaches to answering this. And the first thing is, as you say, children grow up reading or hearing about science fiction. These are proposals for the future. These are potential narratives of our species, and they're also ideas that are bigger than us and our societies. And that's what inspires people. And then people will go and do science. And as a scientist, this is what I've also found, which is the potentials that are presented to us inspire us to carry out the science. And in doing so, you find that they're not impossible. You find ways around it, and you find ways to tackle it using all the knowledge at your disposal and inventing new things. And that's what I really enjoy about science fiction, this idea of, even if the idea is not tenable, that you take something from it and turn it into something else. So, can we go to Mars? I think we can go to Mars.
Oh, I think we can. I totally think we can go. I do think humans to Mars. I just don't think Mars is Plan B.
It is not Plan B. Look, I don't see... My attitude to space exploration is we should do it because it's within us to do it, right? And we should... I totally think we should explore the entire solar system, go to interstellar space if we can. Colonisation, I don't think, is an option, as you say, for survival.
On that, I'm going to lead to the next question, which is directly related, because somebody out there in the public submitted this question to the Wheeler Centre, which is, why can we see into outer space but not the bottom of the ocean?
I have a very strong opinion about this one. And it's short, because we haven't tried that hard enough. We've spent a lot of time looking into, and there are certainly deep sea explorers who spend their entire lives thinking about and going into the sea and exploring it with robots and with deep sea submarines. But it's on Earth. It's right here, and we haven't we don't know a lot about it. It's still definitely a frontier. Of course, space is famously the final frontier, but we still have a lot of exploring to do undersea as well. And the fact we haven't mapped, I mean, we've mapped what it's like down there, but the fact that we haven't actually seen most of the under a certain point is still shocking to me.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I don't know what it is about us that makes us go, oh, we want to go to outer space, but yeah, whatever the ocean, let's dump some nuclear waste in there and not worry about it. Maybe it's something about looking inwards, you really have to come to grips with this planet. If you're going to look at the ocean, you're going to come to grips with the planet a lot more. Discover a whole different world that we can't access, that isn't easy to access. Whereas, when you go outside, the sky is there, you look at it, you're inspired or terrified by the vastness of the universe. Either of those is true. But we haven't bothered developing the technology to go to the bottom of the ocean to the extent that we've developed going into space and building satellites and telescopes. So.
It is a profoundly weird question, right? Like that, or a profoundly weird phenomenon that there are, for whatever you call, there are some definitions of the deep sea where there are fewer people who've been to the deep sea than have been into orbit, and that is, as you say, it's right here. We don't have the mass lifting problems and so on. High pressure has its own issues, but. And I wonder if there isn't, going back to my thesis that all of this reflects our anxieties and delights, that maybe we don't want to explore exactly how finite the ocean is because we've liked to treat it as though it were infinite, it doesn't have that kind of sex appeal that space has that you need to sell big public programs. I don't know. We really depend on the sea bottom, right? Just thinking about undersea cables. We only have one electromagnetic spectrum. So there's only so much satellite communications we're going to be able to do through free space. We need little pocket universes that we insulate in gutta percha and rubber and drop on the sea bottom if we're going to do high-speed data from all over the world to the rest of the world, because otherwise, birds will start falling out of the sky because we're pumping so much radio energy into it. And here we are, depending on these cables draped along these terra incognita. There be dragons, and yet our fiber optics are running through them. It is a profoundly weird phenomenon. And
I think that what you said about we don't want to think about the Earth as being finite, true probably, but also I think that we tend to assume that just because we haven't found something out, it doesn't exist necessarily, whereas space is infinite, right? We can assume there's always something else we haven't seen out there. I've heard, along the history of science, scientists have assumed that things had been discovered, signed, sealed, and delivered. We already know everything there is to know about that, whether it's, the shape of the solar system or the number of particles on a subatomic level. Until we know what we don't know, there is this dangerous assumption that we don't need to keep looking there. And yeah, we thought there weren't deep sea organisms for a long time, and then the more that we look, the more that we find that that's not true. Anytime you just have put a period rather than a question/interrobang on a sentence, that's boring and problematic.
Yeah, I guess so. Like you say, the ocean isn't empty, it's populated, and it's populated at every level. Deep sea vents have strange and bizarre life forms that we couldn't even have conceived of. But I guess I also wonder, there was a tradition of the sea was regarded as a great mystery, and the sea and the sky were great mysteries, but no one cares about the mystery of the ocean anymore as much as they used to. So what happened there? How did that change? I know you do.
Maggie's got a whale on her arm. That's how much. Well, we've mentioned resources, so this next question goes straight to that. Someone has asked, why isn't there more research into making lab-grown hamburgers and mints cheaper? I like the addition of the word cheaper. It was already a good question. Making lab-grown hamburgers and mints, but cheaper.
So when I'm a vegetarian, here's a disclaimer, so I would be very keen on lab-grown hamburgers. But the problem is, what you're trying to do is, meat is muscle, it's a three-dimensional tissue, it's made up of different kinds of cells, and is composed of blood cells and muscle cells and fat cells and all sorts of things going on. When you're growing something in the lab, you tend to grow it in 2 dimensions. It's grown in a flat flask, and you have to take this flat sheet of cells and turn it back into something that's 3D. If you want to replicate the taste, you've got to try and get the flavour of blood in there, because that's the key taste of meat. As someone who eats a lot of fake meat, I can tell you that. And that... recreating this, you're basically reversing the process that you started out with. So first we made three-dimensional cells into 2 dimensions, and now we're trying to go back to that state. It's an incredibly difficult and expensive process, and if we worked that out, we're probably going to get very close to being able to just grow human-sized organs in the lab, because those are the techniques and the principles that we would need to apply. And it's just expensive to do. I also don't know that we can even eliminate every aspect of, so say we've derived the cells from animal sources. We still need to have animal-sourced nutrients to grow the cells, so we're probably not going to get a vegan hamburger out of that per se anytime soon. So it's very difficult to do, and it's expensive, and we're a long way off from getting the substitutes that will make it cheap to grow them.
So by that implication, is a carrot not vegan if there's bone meal in the fertilizer?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I know some vegans, that there's no honey, you don't wear wool garments. It depends on how strict you are, I suppose.
Every vegan eventually meets a breatharian. I don't know that two-dimensional meat's that big. Like, I would eat meat books. That would be awesome.
Well, the thing is that they're sort of like single-celled, and so what happens is, if you leave your cells for too long in culture, they start to grow on top of each other. But there's no density to it. It's just like...
You can make sliced ham, though.
It's not even fun. Like, it's not even like ham or luncheon meat or anything like that. So you'd have to compress it and treat it and get it to that point. It's not very... I assume it's not tasty.
Could we aerosolize it? I mean...
If you really wanted to, but you could just...
Witness!
That could be the future. So in the Soylent Green future, where we're just drinking nutrient drinks, or if you're on a space station, we could do that.
There are a lot of dudes in Silicon Valley who are already living that future.
Yeah, apparently they hate life.
And their digestive systems. The Soylent message boards are entirely about flatulence, bloating, and stool problems. It turns out that, like, hey, isn't eating a pain in the ass? Let's have slurry instead. Is not a proposition that you can get a success out of on your first try.
Surprise.
They should obviously be investing in that. They're putting their money in the wrong.
You know what? We can just put them on one of the arcs, and they can just go and live in their Soylent future, and
Somebody who asked that question, if they did turn up, that they're sitting there with their heart broken now, because it sounds harder than it perhaps seems. So let's see whether there's a more positive response to this next question, which is also to do with sustainability. Someone's asked, why aren't millions more trees being planted around the world? We know it's good for the environment. Surely it would create jobs and income. Why aren't there more trees being planted?
We all just got a little sad up here, I think. Because the simple answer that comes to mind is that people are lazy. It's not. It relates to that last question, which is, why aren't we trying to make this cheaper? Well, as soon as planting lots of trees around the world can be cheaper, then we'll be doing it because money talks, and everybody's spending their energy making money and not just kind of doing the Johnny Appleseed thing. Do you have Johnny Appleseed? You don't have him, but do you know who that is? Johnny Appleseed was a legendary folk hero in the United States who went around just strewing apple seeds
turns out that
around.
what he wanted was to make hard cider.
Yeah, he was a raging alcoholic.
He was a booze freak.
Yeah, and exactly, he had a motivation too. It wasn't just to grow apple trees.
Is that the approach we should be taking? It's like, let's think of, portable cider factories or something like that, and plant trees. No, it's not good.
Well, you laugh, but like Bruce Sterling founded this movement now 15 years ago called the Veridian Greens, and his point was that being green, if it's a hair shirt, if it's about deprivation instead of luxury, that it will never be a mainstream phenomenon, and he wanted to re-envision greenness as a luxury phenomenon. So, he made these observations about cars, and he said, well, we're expending all this energy trying to tell Americans that their cars are too small, and whenever we contemplate hydrogen as a means of storage, we go, oh, well, it's not a very effective means because you need enormous hydrogen cells. Well, the obvious answer is to tell Americans that their cars are, or that their cars are too big. The obvious answer is to tell them their cars are too small, that they should be really driving like utes that look like they've been on steroids, because they can accommodate the giant hydrogen cells. And, you know, across the Midwest, there's enough wind growing across the Great Plains to like power all of America. We just don't have any effective means of storing it. So you drive to work, you plug your car into the windmill, you charge up your, you know, you electrolyze hydrogen out of water, you drive back home. You never have to convince the power authorities to gore their own ox and go with a two-way power grid. You just plug your house into your car, which has got this giant hydrogen cell, and then you go back to work the next day and you charge it again, and, you know, you effectively like just do an end run around all of these problems, and you do it by telling Americans to drive bigger cars, which sounds like an easy sell. And, you know, I wonder if there isn't a way to make trees into an aspirational, positional good. I certainly in Southern California, where I've just moved, trees are an aspirational good, because although they're very good for providing shade, we don't have any water to grow them with. So, you know, if you can afford to water your tree, you're doing well.
Do you like our trees here in Melbourne? We're quite proud of the trees.
I understand that the trees are not especially well adapted to drought, though, that you have a bunch of
we go through some rough times.
Yeah.
We continue this roller coaster because we have got, you know, a fairly limited time together. This is a fascinating question, one of my favourites. Someone has asked, should one use accepted scientific facts or your intuition to form an opinion about a person or issue? It's a good one for Tony Abbott, I reckon.
Maggie, would you like to go first?
You know, actually, I was going to say I should go last, because I want to play devil's advocate on this one. I mean, all of us sitting here probably want to say, scientific facts, come on, obviously. That's the nice thing about science is that there's a peer review system. It's not based on one person's opinion and one person's biological system that told them to think certain things. It's shared. There's a shared responsibility there. I still also want to bring up the point that there's facts and then there's science. Facts is that there is natural phenomena, there's nature, there are the things that are actually happening, some of which we understand, some of which we've identified, some of which we haven't. Science is still a human endeavor, and facts as we define them can change, as we discussed, over time. However far we look into the ocean and into space, we change our understanding of nature and the physical facts all the time. Right. Was that too heavy?
No, I think that's
no such thing.
I think that's right, yeah. I think, like Maggie says, the point is that there's nothing fixed. Knowledge is not fixed, and so it's probably best to go with the evidence presented to you within this, you know, what we know about within science. But to some extent, you're still going to have to use your own intuition to judge whether that evidence is sufficient, whether it's well framed, whether it has, you know, a sound basis to it. So you're still going to rely on the information that you're given and your assessment of it. And that's what scientists do anyway every day. It's just that they're slightly better trained to do it. I guess, you know, they've got prior knowledge that the public doesn't have, and that's where the problems arise. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the question whether you should use facts or intuition to evaluate people or situations, those are two really separate questions, because I think we don't have a whole lot of enduring, widely applicable scientific truths that you can apply to randos that you meet on the street, right? You know, I mean, for all that we have all this talk about things like Darwinian psychology, those are all like just folk tales, right? Like Darwinian psychology is never based on falsifiable hypotheses. My advisor at the University of Waterloo before I dropped out was a biologist named Anne Innes-Dagg, who wrote an amazing book critiquing Darwinian psychology called Love of Shopping is Not a Gene, and talks about how, like, you know, the sociology of Darwinian psychology is that we take things that are screwed up in the world that benefit someone, like wealth disparity or gender disparity, and then we make up Darwinian explanations for why this is the enduring human condition, and then we wash our hands of them. And that these explanations never have any experimental basis and are never falsifiable. So I think that people are different. But I think that situations, certainly often can be reflected in empirical, understood literature. Like, should you use your intuition or science to understand climate change? I think you should use science. Should you use your intuition to understand risk and security and information security and what is and isn't possible with crypto? Like, one of the things you run into a lot when you talk about privacy in crypto is, well, of course the government can break codes if they want to, right? Like, GCHQ totally knows how to break crypto. GCHQ, I bet you a testicle, albeit not one of mine, that GCHQ can't break crypto. They do that by doing things like introducing bugs in random number generators, but well-implemented cryptography algorithms just work for the same reason that other mathematical ideas that are widely explored and debated just work. And so I think that, like, using facts and science to evaluate empirical situations is a good thing, but people, it's different.
I'll also say that I think intuition gets a bad rap because it's supposedly, different than the facts. However, inside your brain, intuition, what we know as intuition, is basically the subconscious calling upon things that have happened to you, which are facts. You know, you have a memory, whether it's a traumatic thing that's happened or a sensing of hormones or something. Your brain knows something that you don't know. And to go back to what Upulie said, scientists can use that to their benefit too. A good scientist also has intuition and won't ignore it. You going out about your day, you can call upon your intuition, and it's not that it's unfactual, if you will.
It's not irrational.
Right, it's not irrational. Instinct, on the other hand, can be irrational.
Yeah.
And you probably shouldn't to always listen to your instinct if you want to be in human society as a contributing member of human society.
And, you know, like, cognitive behavioral therapy is all based on the idea of subjecting your intuition to rational scrutiny. And, you know, asking yourself if the way you feel now is reflected in the reality as you understand it later, and then intervening later the next time you feel that way by reminding yourself that the last time you were unduly worried about some situation, it turned out that it wasn't that bad, and actually doing record keeping the way you do in a lab, because we have, you know, very malleable memories, and so we need memory prostheses to keep track of that sort of thing.
We'll move to a fairly broad question now, but feel free to answer it however you wish, potentially from a scientific perspective or not. Someone has asked this question: does capitalism inspire or suppress creativity?
Depends on how much of a capitalist you are, I suppose. If you automatically want to cash in on your own creativity, you'll probably keep being creative. That said, people are creative who don't have the means to have access to the benefits of capitalism, and their creativity may not be suppressed, but it's certainly not beneficial or encouraged.
Or it's limited by.
It's limited by, yeah. And meanwhile, right, exactly. Then maybe they would like to be more creative. Maybe they have the capacity to be creative, but capitalism keeps them down, man. No, but truly, we know that people animals, when they're stressed, are less likely to be creative. If you're stressed because you live in capitalist society, you have to do what you have to do to get through the day. You won't have the mental means to go about what you would like to do with your creative part of your life. It just won't happen. Creativity won't happen as much because you will have been stressed to the point of just getting through your day. Is that true, do you think?
Yeah, I guess
Molecular
so.
biology-wise?
I guess there's a few things that occur to me on that. And the first is that a lot of the great art in history that has survived or that was supported was due to someone's enormous wealth funding it and giving that artist the time and the space to create that, however commissioned it might have been. So there's that kind of benefit of extreme wealth and capitalism contributing towards that, but at the same time, as a molecular biologist for whom funding is a continual issue, what I find when it comes to science and money is like, and this is because we're increasingly talking about innovation all the time, translational research, all of that. I feel to some extent it limits what we can explore and what we will research, because the sentiment is always, is this going to be translatable? Is this about getting a new therapy out? Is it about getting a new device out? Rather than looking at what we traditionally look at in science, which is, physical phenomena and, and inventing new things. And so there's always going to be this tension, because there's always going to be limited funds with what you can and what you do with it. But I do worry that having that pressure, funding pressure, then reduces our creativity as a result.
So, I think it's an and, not an or, clearly. I also don't think that we know what creativity is. I don't think there's any good functional definition of creativity. But, enabling, oh God. That poor fly. Sorry, we've got a drowning. Is there an entomologist in the house?
It's just a common garden variety housefly.
Don't drink that water.
No, I'm not
That's gross. It's clear that giving people incentives to be creative in the form of an upside does inspire some people to some forms of creativity. It's also clear that it forecloses on some kinds of creativity, right? Every exclusive right is understood by economists to foreclose on some creativity. We know that, right? We know for certain that if you give someone a patent, that it comes at the expense, that exclusivity and that exclusive access to that invention comes at the expense of follow-on inventions that might occur, which is why we make the patent of limited time. And we try to find a system of trade-offs. One of the things that James Boyle, who's a scholar of intellectual property law, says is that copyright is one of the great evidence-free zones, because wherever the ideal terms of copyright, the ideal terms of patent, the scope of patent, and so on have been examined, the conclusion is that it should be relatively short and relatively limited. But the a priori decision is always to expand it. And we have examples of fields where there are no exclusive rights, where we have very, very fast innovation, although the innovation is very market-driven. So fashion, for example, there's no exclusive rights at all into the designs of fashion. The two-dimensional images on fashion, the thing on the t-shirt is copyrightable, but there are no copyrights or patents in the design of a jacket. And what this has clearly done is driven more fashion, not less. Because if you're a fashion house, whatever you've made that's successful is immediately knocked off, and you have to come up with something new. So does that drive creativity? Well, in the sense that there's more stuff than there was before. There's if you think of it maybe from a information theory perspective, there's more entropy in the system, right? There's fewer predictable outcomes than there were before. There's more combinatorial, interesting stuff emerging. Clearly that's creative, but it comes at the expense of people who might make stuff if they didn't have to respect someone else's exclusive rights. Kevin Kelly talks about the idea of the adjacent possible, that there are a lot of scientific ideas that recur through history, like aviation. Aviation on its face is actually kind of an obvious idea. Wouldn't it be great to fly is a thing that everybody has thought through all of the ages since the earliest time. And so, yeah, you find doodles of helicopters and airplanes in the margins of manuscripts going back thousands of years. What you don't have is steel and lots of experience flying kites and lightweight alloys and all the rest of it until you do, and then 20 people, independent of one another, invent airplanes or radios or television. Right? All of our great innovations of the last couple of centuries are contemporaneous all around the world, and Kevin Kelly's explanation for that is because these ideas recur all the time, once all of the substrate is there to make it possible to combine stuff that exists, then it does. And that seems to be driven in part by market economics and in part by centrally planned economics. The space program is very creative, but it's a command economy, right? Space, all of the stuff that we've done in space with tiny little junk around the margins has been done by fiat, by giant states decreeing things. It's been pretty creative.
We'll have a chance in a second for people to ask questions, so if you do have a burning question, prepare thy hand. But before that moment, just a nice, simple, light question for you guys. What is the one mechanism that will unify all of humanity for common good? Submitted by one of you out there, bless your cotton socks. Let's nail it right now.
Right. So mechanism, we're looking for a mechanism rather than a value or a. Can you read the question
Certainly.
again?
Is the person here who submitted this, by the way? No, they just dropped it and flew overseas probably. They thought, what is the one mechanism that will unify all of humanity for common good?
There's so many words there. Mechanism, common good, unify all of humanity. There's a lot of factors at play.
So it's a grand unified theory of human civilization.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'm just gonna say that's never gonna happen.
Come on, we need some optimism here.
I mean, I want to plot it like a genie in a bottle story, where that's your wish, and so the genie reduces the entire population of the human race to 2 people who happen to like each other, and there you go, right? I mean.
So back to Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Is the mechanism then magic? Is that what we're talking about?
No, mass extinction.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No, mass extinction.
Population control.
Yeah. Obviously, agreement is easier with smaller numbers of people, right? The collective action problem gets simpler. So, if there were only 2 of us.
Can we at least make it 4, Cory? Just so, come on, we're right here.
The fact that we just disagreed suggests that we can't.
But the 4 of us would just go around planting trees and making, artificial meat in labs, and we'd be getting on fine.
Meat books.
But who's going to pay us to do that?
Oh, you're right.
I don't feel like doing it unless someone's going to pay me to.
We have time for one more of the submitted questions before we throw it to the audience, and this is less heavy. This is simply, are we becoming...
Said that last time. I don't know how to believe it.
Are we becoming Generation Device?
Device.
Are we becoming Generation Device?
Device.
Device. D-E-V-I-C-E.
Generation or generation?
Generation.
Oh, like we are, like capital G, capital G.
Yeah.
Like,
Got it.
it was Spice Girls Generation X, and now us, Generation Device.
I'm pretty sure that, cave people thought that they were Generation Device.
Yeah.
Until, like, the older generation was like, you kids with your fire these days. Everybody sits around looking at the fire.
Socrates had tons of anxiety about reading, right? He was like, you're not going to memorize the books? How will you know the books if you don't memorize the books? Right? I mean, clearly that anxiety is old.
I still have anxiety about that.
I find it a bit, people whinging about how many people are on their phones and everything these days, but I assume, people got addicted to the wireless radio in the 20s and 30s, like, it's just constant.
And TV and video, everything. We're going to be addicted to every new technology and terrified by
Waltzes
it.
were the source of enormous social anxiety about how it brought the men and women together, and novels were really bad for young women.
They're corruptors, right?
So yeah, very corrupting. And I think that there is a big gendered part of technology panics. Technology adopted by women tends to be particularly panicsome in the social mores. Mizuka Ito at the University of California at Irvine has a really good answer to the how are iPads changing our kids' brains question. And she says well, first of all, they probably are changing kids' brains because you think with your brain. And so when you think about stuff, your brain is in a different state than it was before you thought about it because something physical happens in your brain. So everything you do changes your brain, including eating spaghetti. Mm-hmm. So yes, iPads change your brain. How is it changing your brain? Well, you have to wait 10 years. And then do a cohort study, at which point there won't be any iPads anymore. And so you will have learned precisely nothing of any use to you, right? And I think that's an excellent, excellent answer.
Well, I guess we're asking, are we going to be Generation Devices if, these external devices are going to be the single game-changing thing for the rest of the future? But in the future, we're probably going to be part device anyway. We're probably going to have all kinds of, installations for, if your pancreas fails, you're going to have a device that will substitute for it. That will be a microfluidic device that releases insulin when you require it, and it will be electronically tethered probably to your phone. You might have an artificial retina implanted into you. You might have a Google Glass if you're really terrible, but we can probably have. You can probably have a convenient version, which is actually a retina. So you do have the internet streaming on your eyeball all the time. But, basically watching these new inventions unfold means we're probably going to be part device, and then we have to ask which part of us is actually human in the future. So Generation Device, small fry comparison.
I mean, if I grew up with Walkman. People younger than me grew up with MP3 players. We are all destined to having hearing aids if we're not killed by self-driving cars first, right? And so we will all have at least one prosthesis. And yeah, they are all phone headsets, right? They are all Bluetoothed these days. So yeah, absolutely.
But if they're part of you, then are they still a device? It seems like device has to be sort of external.
Well, if they have to be implanted, I suppose they do. We haven't gotten to the point where we're going to be part robot, but I'm sure that time is also coming.
Right, they still have to be implanted. We're not going to be born with them.
Not yet.
Well,
those
would
kids
you
today.
want to be? I mean, the one thing we know about technology is that it accelerates. And so, you know, having a Pentium implanted in your brain, the problem with that isn't the implant part, it's the Pentium part, because,
Well, is it an implantation that's an enhancement or a replacement for a function that you've lost?
So ideally what you want is something that's modular and can be swapped. I mean, that's why cochlear implants work the way they do. They don't put the logic in the implant, they put it in the external piece that sticks on, because that piece can be swapped out more readily.
So it's how you design it and what the purpose of the implant is for. So,
I mean, this is an issue of incredible moment right now, because most medical implants these days are shipping with wireless interfaces for telemetry readout and for firmware upgrades. And it's a huge information security problem. So Barnaby Jack gave a presentation in Sydney in 2013 where he demonstrated taking over implanted defibrillators from 10 meters and administering lethal shocks to their wearers. And Dick Cheney's defibrillator has its wireless turned off. So, you know, his firmware upgrades involve a scalpel, right? But he, because, you know, it's difficult to plug a USB cable into something in your chest cavity. But at the same time, you know, you really do want to be able to talk to these devices when they're inside of you.
And remotely, you do want to be able to have some degree of remote control. I think it was Lauren Bukes, and I mean, there's been a few sort of films and stories about, you know, like if you want to implant artificial muscles into people, and whether you can control them from a distance, and is that an enhancement or a replacement? What will that do for the nature of sport and so on? So,
well, I think the reality is if you can control them from close up, you can control them from a distance, right? Once they are controllable.
That's it.
This is the nature of the network. If you can tether them to your phone, then you can control your phone over the internet, which means you can control whatever it is your phone is tethered to.
So the hive mind is inevitable. One way or another.
Or the griefer attack, where, I mean, I really do worry about this. So there's a guy named Hugh Hare at the MIT Media Lab who runs their prosthetics lab, and he gives this incredible presentation where he just shows slide after slide of like bodies integrated with computers and machines in ways that is profoundly, life-changingly brilliant. Legs, arms, feet, hands, magnetic stimulation for untreatable depression, just incredible stuff. And then his showstopper ending is, you know, he does it from a podium standing up, and he clicks to his last slide, and it's him climbing a mountain, and it reveals that he's got amputations of both knees, and he's climbing the mountain wearing robot mountain climbing legs. And he rolls up his trouser legs to reveal that he in fact does have full radial amputations of both knees. He explains that he lost them to frostbite in a mountaineering accident, and then he starts running up and down the stage on his robot legs like a mountain goat. It's amazing. So I saw him do this talk in London, and the first question anyone asked was like, who can afford those legs? And he said, why, or no, how much did they cost, right? And he names like this crazy price. The second question was, who can afford them? And he's like, well, anyone, because if it's a choice between a mortgage on a house and having legs, you'll take legs. But the idea that there'll be things that are part of your body that you don't own actually has really profound implications, going back to, is capitalism good or bad for creativity? If you have a car, there's 1 million cars on the road in America that were funded with subprime loans, and they all have ignition overrides that are remote controllable, so they can be repoed by the lender if you miss your payments. And of course, once you design a computer to defy its owner, there's always the possibility that someone will make it defy you. And you take the subprime car future and the Hugh Hare leg future, and you've got subprime legs that walk themselves back to the repo depot. And you've got, you know, dictators in Yugoslavia or in Ukraine during the next Euromaidan uprising, just having everybody walk home, right? Like, You know, there are some really grave implications for all of this.
And that's even leaving aside the development of artificial intelligence as it goes. So as you say, does it become sentient, or, you know, develop an intelligence that's so great that it's gone, I'm going to make the decisions between the individual and the company that owns the product.
Yeah,
as well.
and, you know, even if I'm not a believer in strong AI, but if you believe in supervised machine learning, which I think you have to believe in because it exists and we do it today, will it come out to implications that we can't understand? Like, will the next Dieselgate with Volkswagen not be that engineers design their cars to fool regulators, but that you write a self-modifying algorithm that says, do a directed random walk, right? Try random things and then improve them incrementally to get better gas mileage. And one of the strategies that it randomly hits on is like, oh, if whenever I'm in for a smog inspection, I dial down my efficiency and dial up my fuel efficiency and dial up my emissions efficiency, then I pass regulatory testing and I can escape and reverse that calculation and turn back into a mobile gas chamber, and that gives me a better victory condition, which is my gas mileage. You know, like, we see this in the human world all the time. In the Soviet Union, when they rewarded nail factories based on the number of nails they produced, they made tiny little nails, and then when they rewarded them based on the average size of the nails, they made one giant one, right? Like, you know.
That's fantastic.
On the note of the giant nail, we'll throw the floor open now. If anybody does have a burning question for these fabulous minds. Everyone's terrified to engage. Right at the front. Hello, sir.
Oh, thanks. So I was expecting to have to go to work today, but earlier in the week I actually managed to automate what I was going to have to do today. So that means that today I'm not getting paid, so there's no money transfer from the wealthy person who pays me to me, but it also means I get to sit here and listen to you talk and relax. I wonder, sort of looking forward to the future and thinking about the future of automation, do you see a future of full unemployment, and is that a good thing or is that a dystopia?
Chet, you're not an aeroplane pilot, so... Okay.
That's a really complicated question. I guess the question is, so how much automation will we have? To what degree? What are the implications for society? Well, how much of that is under our control, and how much of that will be driven by demand, by economic imperatives? Like, do we get to control how we want that future to look? Do we want to control how much automation we have, like what jobs will be and won't be? What will people do as a response to that? What kind of jobs will they have? What kind of lifestyles are we aiming to have? I guess those are the things just more questions that I have in response to that. I don't know what you...
More questions is fine.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole point why we're here.
I took a stab at this at the last time, an hour ago, and so rather than repeat that, I guess one of the things I'd like to ask or put out there is what's the difference between a job and a hobby? You know, everything that you do that's hard, that is difficult, it has a trough of despair, right? It has a phase you go through where it just doesn't feel great. Whether that's writing a novel or being a parent or being married, right? Like, all of those things, all long-term hard projects have a point at which it doesn't feel like it's worth it, where you have to gut it out to get out the other side. You know, we are able to do that for intrinsic reasons. Like, we're able to motivate ourselves for intrinsic reasons to do hard stuff. If we automated away all of the stuff that people only do if they have extrinsic motivation, what's left? What does our day look like? I don't think that we'll lack for hard and rewarding things, but it will be very interesting. I just finished a novel about a non-scarce society where work doesn't have to exist, called Walk Away, that'll be out in 2017. And there's a mathematician who's walked away from economic maths, from doing maths for rich people, from being a quant to doing maths for math's sake. And she said, like, a job, to make maths a job means that you figured out a way to make it so shitty that I'll only do it if you pay me, right? And that's not how I started doing maths, and not why I want to keep on doing maths. And I guess there's something to that. Maybe that's what our future looks like if we can automate everything away.
I think it's important to bring up too that there are always going to, well, maybe not always, but to remember that there are people who do things because they have to, that there are jobs that are subsistence. There are people who currently hold the place of the automaton, and capitalism depends on those people. There are also people who are just living hand to mouth in subsistence societies who don't have the option of outsourcing that to anyone else. And those aren't fun jobs. They don't have time for hobbies. I don't necessarily know if that answers your question, but I just think it's important to remember that that's still part of this equation, that when we get to talk about having the option of walking away from the job on a given day. Not you specifically. I'm here too as well. But that problem hasn't been solved. That there are still people who serve the role of something that could potentially be replaced by a machine, and may yet be, and puts people out of jobs. The people making the large nail and the small nail didn't make the decision to make the small nail or the small nails or the large nail, but are part of that big machine that asks those questions and feeds them or doesn't feed them.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and are those the people with those kind of jobs that aren't currently automated but could be automated? There's menial jobs. Are they the ones who are going to have them automated? Are they, what happens to them then?
Right.
It's not just going to be, say, jobs here where, someone's going to be driving. The car is self-driving, the experiments are done by a robot, all of that sort of thing. It's not necessarily just going to be those jobs, so what happens then?
What I said when I was on the stage last, when someone asked about this, is that there's nothing great about the fact that all of us use toilets, but only some of us clean them. But at the same time, if we automated toilet cleaning and then found no other economic way for the people who used to clean toilets to survive, that also isn't a very good outcome. But the fact that it isn't a good outcome if we don't find a way for them to survive doesn't mean that making self-cleaning toilets is a bad thing.
Right.
Which Japan has already done.
We agreed backstage that we would alternate between people who identify as men and people who identify as women during the Q&A. So if there are any people who identify as women who'd like to ask the next question.
Come on, ladies.
There's a guy there just about to identify as a woman just to get his question.
Or people who identify as non-binary as well.
Or otherwise, if no other, then we will happily accept any question, because we'll probably only have time for one more before we all go on our merry way. If there's no other questions, oh, we do have one.
No,
Thank
there
you.
we go.
Thank you.
If you're if you weren't looking at the primary interest of your scientific interest that you look at, what other science would you focus your career on?
Oh man.
Is this like all the science we would like to do?
Yeah.
Oh. Go first. All of the science. I would like to do all of the science.
I think I've most scientists who have reached a certain level of success in their careers. I'm thinking of several, and many of them come to a certain point in their career where they look back and wish they'd done a different thing. Sometimes that takes the form of just looking back at all the disciplines and going, all of those disciplines aren't really that different. Why are we sort of siloing them the way that we do? And what if I could apply the things that I've learned about astrophysics to biological mechanisms? Wouldn't that be cool if I could go back in time and knowing the things I know now, do it all again? So in my ideal world, if I weren't studying the way that humans learn about science and trying to apply it, which I still may try and do, it would be learning about all of the sciences, having them talk to each other, and living forever so that I could do that forever.
Yeah, I think
Really
that's what I would like as well. I'm currently in transdisciplinary work, so that means I have to. I've trained as a molecular biologist, and what that means is I have a set of skills that can be applied through all kinds of research in biology. But now I'm working in engineering, and so I have to learn all this chemistry and physical chemistry that I never learned before, and it's fantastic. And I really regret not following that because it would have been easier on me now as well. But But the main thing is that you're applying all of these different principles to invent and create and discover new things. And I think for people who are now going through science, it will be different to those of us who went through it, say, 10, 20 years ago, where the disciplines were separated out, and you just end up in either biology or mostly the physics or chemistry. And so it's changing now anyway, but all of the science, all the time.
I have a friend who's a forensic statistician, this guy Patrick Ball from the Human Rights Data Analysis Group, and he's like the biggest science hero I know. So he works on extrapolating the full scale of atrocities at human rights trials by doing rigorous statistical extrapolations of fragmentary data from survivors of massacres, and he's amazing. And so I would go and do forensic stats. I think that would be an awesome discipline to get into.
And since you asked, if I wasn't a musical comedian, I would have colonised Mars by now. That's pretty much my thing. Guys, please thank our incredible panel for this session. What a joy. Maggie, Upulie, Cory.